Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here today with a book tag. I actually saw Charlotte over at Charlotte Malloy do this book tag just really recently, just this week, and I actually really liked the questions, so I decided I would do it as well. I will leave her channel linked below and where she got the tag, which I think is from a book blog, and I will get on to the questions, which is literally just a kind of the type of tag that I really love, which is just kind of like a little bit of a discussion tag about my likes and my things that I don't like within books. So this is the smash or pass book tag. And the first smash or pass question is bookish tropes. And I just think this means like all types of bookish tropes. So for this one, yeah, I'm definitely like a real sucker for particular tropes. If I know things are enemies to lovers, I will probably want to go for it. I just love the hate to love storyline. I also really love fake dating as well. I always just think it's a very cute storyline too. And a lot of my bookish tropes as well are generally to do with like romance or contemporary books, but there are kind of some tropes as well that you would see in, say, fantasy or sci-fi, things like the chosen one trope. I do like it when it's done well. There was a time where it got a little bit boring, but I do tend to like a good chosen one trope, especially if it's to do with like a magical school or magic in some way. I always think it's really interesting to see how that one is done. Now I don't have like a list of tropes in front of me, so I'm sure there are some that I don't like. Things like, love at first sight and things like that, or insta love. I wouldn't be really into that. But yeah, definitely enemies to lovers, fake dating, chosen one, all those type of tropes, I would definitely smash them. The next question is alternating POV. So this just means a kind of, I guess, like chapter from one character and another chapter from a different character. I don't mind this. This is kind of like a neutral. It's neither a smash nor a pass for me because I think it depends on the type of storyline. It also depends on how many characters you're following. Sometimes you can follow too many characters and then it can kind of get confusing when you're in so many different parts of the story. It can be kind of confusing when you go back to a different section and you're trying to remember what happened when it's been like 5 or 6 chapters since you've just been with that character. But there are other times when I've had that many characters where I've quite enjoyed it. The one I'm thinking of from the top of my head is the Faithful and the Fallen series, which is one that follows quite a number of characters, but they're all very important characters. They're all in various different parts of the world that you're following in, so you're seeing different political elements from every kind of twist and turn, and you're seeing different ideas, you're seeing different points of views and things like that, and I think that's kind of important for the story that you're following. Sometimes I do think there are certain times when you might just not like a character, so being in that character's point of view is off-putting and it means that I might not enjoy the book as much. But yeah, again, it depends on the story, it depends on how vast the story is. Does it like make sense to have that like other POV, or would you just be better off spent in the one character's head all the time? So it's definitely like it really depends on the book. The next smash or pass is ambiguous endings. So I think this just means endings that aren't, completely clear, aren't really tied up in a neat little bow. This one is probably one where I would pass on. Like, I don't mind them, but I generally do really love seeing a story like be completely like, wrapped up really nicely. The only way it kind of feels weird sometimes if things are wrapped up really tightly is if it's been a very kind of tense, violent thriller or something like that, or something like a horror book where things have gone really wrong for the majority of the book. So sometimes seeing kind of like almost like a happy-go-lucky ending and everyone happy and nice and like living their life can be just a little bit odd in comparison to the rest of the book. But with a variety, for like most stories, I do like seeing things wrapped up really nicely. I love kind of seeing at the very end maybe a little bit of an epilogue. I am a little bit of a sucker for those epilogues where you see where all the characters are and you see them enjoying their life, and you see them with like families or spouses or stuff like that, and you kind of just can get a sense of where they went next with the story. But yeah, I would definitely prefer kind of a very complete ending rather than an ambiguous ending. The next one is non-fiction. This is definitely a smash for me. I do try and read a good bit of nonfiction. I'm actually, this year and last year, I have done a reading challenge where I've tried to read at least one nonfiction every month. And I really enjoyed that. And I'll probably continue that over the next few years of my reading. I do really like changing things up. Like, I generally read majority fiction every single month, but I do love adding in a nonfiction. And I mostly tend to read kind of feminist nonfiction, or books particularly around like women's stories or feminism within Ireland as well. But I have kind of branched out a little bit more in terms of, say, like nature nonfiction as well. And those are kind of the ones that I do like I like to read and ones that I probably feel a little bit more confident reading as well. Like there's certain types of nonfiction that I probably wouldn't feel as confident, things around like politics or science and things like that, where I might not be as confident reading or understanding and might not be one that I would enjoy as much. So that it's generally like nonfiction generally really goes the nonfiction I read is very much attuned to my own interests. So yeah, feminism, just like women's stories, particularly in Ireland, and then a little bit of Irish history, but not too much, and then nature, particularly like dogs, horses, and stuff like that, and then maybe memoirs and stuff by well-known people like Michelle Obama, and Mary Robinson and stuff like that. So yeah, those are the ones that I've really, really enjoyed. The next one is historical setting. This is obviously a smash for me because I do tend to read a lot of historical fiction, and I think the majority of books I have read this year have just tended to be a historical fiction. And yeah, I always really, really enjoy historical fiction. I love learning about different historical settings through my books and through fictional stories. There are certain time periods that I enjoy more. I really love reading books set in 1900s in Ireland. I really love books set around the Irish Civil War or the Irish War of Independence. I think it's a really, really interesting time in Irish history. So I love reading stories set around that time. I also really, really love stories set around the War of the Roses or the Tudor era in England as well. I really enjoy that. So yeah, I really do think that historical fiction tends to also be an education in many ways, and I always love that. The next one is morally grey characters. This is probably a smash for me for the most part. Again, there have been some books I have read that have had morally grey characters where I've just not gotten on with the writing. The ones that I can think of most recently have been the Intoxicating Mr. Lavelle and Radical Love, both written by Neil Blackmore. I talked about that in my recent wrap-up where I was saying, his characters tend to be very morally grey, but just the way he writes them definitely they just don't gel with me, so I haven't really enjoyed them. But there have been other characters that are kind of, I guess, anti-hero type morally grey characters that I have also enjoyed. And again, it depends on the book, it depends on the type of writing it is, but it's probably more, is it more of a pass than a smash? I'm not sure. The next one is first person POV. I don't mind a first person POV. I generally like, yeah, it is probably is it the one I read the most of? Like, I actually don't tend to take much notice of the narration style unless it's second person narrative, which just tends to be a little bit unusual. So that's the only time I really take notice. I actually don't find I take notice of how many, I must start doing it to see how many of the books I read are third person versus first person. Probably more third person, so I think third person can be interesting sometimes because then you can sometimes get glimpses of how other characters are acting or how other characters, where if you're in first person, you're probably a little bit more limited about what they're seeing exactly or what they're thinking exactly in their point of view. So if I would have to choose, I'd probably go third person over first person. But again, it's not something that I tend to take too much notice of when I'm reading a book unless it's very, very important to the story. The next one is audiobooks. This is obviously a smash for me. I always have an audiobook on the go. This is only in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, to be honest. When I first started BookTube, I never read audiobooks. I just didn't really understand the why people loved them so much. And then eventually my library, their online services improved a lot more, and then I actually had access to audiobooks, and I started realizing that I really liked reading audiobooks while I was walking around, while I was on my commute, stuff like that, and I actually found them really, really handy. And then ever since then, I've always had one or two. I normally have one audiobook on the go and another one lined up to start as soon as that one finishes. I always kind of know what my next audiobook will be. But yeah, every time I go for a walk every single day with my dog, and that walk is generally about an hour long, and I'm always reading an audiobook during that walk, so that's where I get a lot of my audiobook listening done. So yeah, I'm definitely a smash for audiobooks. The next one is rereading. This is definitely a smash for me. I love rereading. I love rereading favorites. I love rereading books that I just feel like has been too long since I've read them and I want to experience the story again for whatever reason. But it's definitely something that I don't give myself enough time to do. It's one that I keep saying every single year I have certain books I say I want to reread these, and I just haven't prioritized them enough. I am at the moment rereading the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, and I have enjoyed that, but again, it's been a very, very slow reread for me. It's one that's taking place every few months rather than like every month or every few weeks, which is probably what I would like to do instead. But And then I have a bunch of other series that I would like to reread. The ones that I think I'm going to reread very soon. I'm kind of in my Hunger Games era again since the trailer and like the stills and stuff have come out for A Ballad of Songbird and Snakes. So I really want to reread the Hunger Games again and also reread A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes before the movie comes out in November. So that will be a reread that I'm doing. I still want to reread the Faithful and the Fallen series. I read the first one a couple of years ago. I want to continue on and read the second, third, and fourth one at some point. I'm not sure when. Well, so there's loads of ones I want to reread. I just need to find the time to do it. The next one is classic novels, and this again it's not really a smash or a pass. I don't like reading a lot of them all in one go because I find some of them, not all of them, I do find some of them a little bit harder to get into or understand, or just the writing style as well can be a little bit iffy. I have just recently finished a classic which I have in front of me, and that is The Mill on the Floss, and this took me like a few weeks to read. It's like quite a chunky book, as you can see. The writing is fairly small, and it was probably like a 3-star read for me overall, and it's not one that I will read again. I'm not sure if it's one I will be thinking about a lot, but then I've read other books that I've really enjoyed. I reread Persuasion last year and it became one of my favorite reads of the year. I loved it so much more in a reread as well. There are other classic books I really love. I really love The Call of the Wild by Jack London. I really love that one. That's one I want to reread as well. And I do have a challenge this year, which is I want to try and read at least 6 classics this year. There's a few other ones I have lined up to read this year. So yeah, it's definitely not a pass for me, but it's not necessarily a smash either. It's not something I really love doing. It's just one that I want to challenge myself now and again to do, but it's not something I'm like super focused on either. The next one is definitely a pass for me, and that is annotating my books. I've never gone into annotating. It's not something I do. I think it's because I actually don't keep a lot of the books that I read. I know I have a lot of books behind me, but I have 2 shelves of books. Most of them, no. Okay, it's probably like half of them to 60% maybe I've read. Some of them I haven't read. I do have a TBR cart as well, but I also have a bunch of books right beside me, which is just like my pile of books that I am eventually going to give away. I have a few people in my life that will take books from me. My mom tends to take books from me a lot of the time for her work. They kind of have a little library and work, and she always brings in books from me for that, and they're always really grateful for that. So yeah, I generally, when I finish a book, I generally will always, unless it's a real favorite of mine, or there's something really important in it, or I find it really poignant in some way, it's generally always going to go on an unhaul pile, and will make its way out of the house eventually. And then if I decide later on, I'm like, oh, I regret giving away that book, I know then that book made an impact on me, and I might get another copy of it, and that's the one I will keep. So yeah, annotating is just something that I just have never done, maybe because I know there's probably a less likely chance that I will actually keep the book on my shelf. But it's just not something that comes naturally to me when I'm reading. There is sometimes, like very rarely, there is books or like things like that I will decide to annotate or underline. This actually a recent book I read, Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. As you can see, this is the first time I ever actually put a sticky tab in a book so I could remember a quote, and I underlined it. And this is mostly so like when I review it that I can like read out the quote. I don't know, again, I'm not sure this is a book that I will keep on my shelf for very long, but it's a quote that I remembered anyway. So yeah, but that's very, very rare for me to do. I think that, as I said, it's the first time I've ever actually put a sticky tab in a book. So yeah, annotating is just, it's not something I like to do. It's not something that comes natural to me. I don't think I will ever be an annotator, and that's okay. The next one is cracking book spines, and this is probably a pass for me. It's not something I tend to naturally do when I'm reading a book. I guess if I'm looking at this book, there is a line in it from when I was like reading the book, but I don't even want to do it. I haven't like given it that big like crack where I've really folded it over. Yeah, it's not something that I naturally will do to a book, and I think I'm also sometimes afraid of like wrecking a book, not necessarily wrecking a book, but like even something like where like wrecking enough where like pages might fall out or anything. It's just, yeah, it's not something that I will do to a book. Now I won't be like super like precious with the book. It's not like I'll sit there like this reading the book, afraid to give it a crease. I'm not afraid of creasing a book, but I won't crack it. The next one is Smut, and this is probably a smash for me, but it's definitely like a not a rare not a rare smash for me, but it's something I do enjoy on occasion, and I tend to go towards kind of the smutty books or books that have like those kind of spicy scenes. It's ones that I tend to use if I feel like I need a palate cleanser or something fun or something like that. But I wouldn't be able to read a lot of them in one go. It's something that I just use every now and again as a palate cleanser. Something I don't need to think about too much. Something that doesn't need a very like critical review or anything like that. It's something I just do for myself, something for fun, and I generally will always enjoy it. Just as I said, it's just reading for fun. So yeah. The next one is character driven books. So again, might not be something that I always, it's generally something when I go to like review a book on Storygraph and it asks me if it's like character or plot driven, and I really have to think about it and be like, was it character driven or was it plot driven? It's not something that I will take a huge notice of when I'm reading a book, unless it's very, very obvious. This one is a past present split timeline, and again, this is a little bit of both. I do think it works sometimes, a past and a present timeline. But I often find that I generally like either one timeline a little bit more, and I get annoyed then when it switches back to the other timeline. There are very few times that I like them both equally. So yeah, sometimes I guess it's more of a pass and a smash then, because I generally do always like one timeline better, and sometimes I feel like you don't really need to know the timeline at all. One of them I can think of actually is the book Great Circle, where there was a past timeline and a present timeline. I think you could take away the present timeline in that book and just have the past timeline, and the book will be just as good. Then the last one is heavy world building. This one might be a pass for me. It's not something that I like I hate in books. I do appreciate world building. I appreciate knowing how things work. But then there are other times I've read particularly fantasy or sci-fi books where there's so much emphasis on the world and how it works and everything that it can almost take away from the actual storyline of what's happening. You can end up getting confused about like the mechanics of everything rather than the actual story that you're following. It is important to know how things work, but I think it's okay sometimes to have a rudimentary knowledge rather than a whole world history. I do think it is amazing, some authors, the type of worlds that they create and the lore and the history and all of that, the religion. I do think it's absolutely amazing seeing what they can create, but sometimes yeah, if it's too much, it can just be confusing and overdone, and yeah, you almost need like a glossary or something to be able to keep up with it all. So yeah, if I had to choose, I'd probably pass, and I'd rather some really amazing characters over really heavy world building. So yeah, that is the Smash or Pass book tag, and as I said, I will leave the questions and stuff down below if anyone else wants to do this. I just thought it was a fun tag to be able to discuss a little bit. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any like firm smashes or passes with any of these? I would love to be able to discuss down below. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time.